Article 370 of the Constitution of India is a temporary provision inserted on 17th October 1949, which gave special powers to the state of Jammu and Kashmir lawfully, authorizing it to have its own constitution, a state flag, and autonomy over the internal administration of the state. Accordingly, the provision of only Article 1 and Article 370 of the Indian Constitution apply to the state. Similarly, Article 35A of the Constitution of India, which was derived from the notification of 1927 and 1935 by Maharaja, introduced through a constitutional order in 1954, authorized the state legislature to define permanent residents. Only those defined as permanent residents were entitled to property in Kashmir. Let us remember that this special status was not something which the people of Kashmir demanded. They have always demanded and have affirmed strongly that they only accept the right of self-determination to decide the future of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. This article was indeed brought into the Constitution of India and was promised to the people of Kashmir to circumvent the plebiscite as promised. The government of India, with connivance of the interim government of Kashmir of Sheikh Abdullah, recommended to convene the Constituent Assembly. On 1st May 1951, Karan Singh, then the head of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, issued a proclamation directing the formation of this assembly through election. The United Nations responded at once. The United Nations Security Council responded to this election of Constituent Assembly in its Resolution 91, dated 30th March 1951, that it would not consider these elections to be substitute for a free and impartial plebiscite to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. However, the 1951 elections of Constituent Assembly were said to be totally rigged. Polls were conducted only in Indian-occupied Kashmir in August and September 1951. There were not a single woman vote registered in 1951 in state of Jammu and Kashmir. The Constituent Assembly, after its establishment, was empowered to recommend the articles of the Indian Constitution that should be applied to the state or to abrogate the Article 370 altogether. After consultation with the state's Constituent Assembly, the 1954 presidential order was issued specifying the articles of the Indian constitutions that apply to the state. The Constituent Assembly dissolved itself without recommending the abrogation of Article 370. The article was therefore deemed to have become a permanent feature of the Indian Constitution. And as a result of this interpretation, in April 2018, the Supreme Court of India ruled that Article 370 had attained permanency since the State Constituent Assembly has ceased to function. To overcome this legal challenge, the Indian government instead rendered Article 370 as inoperative, even though it still exists in the Indian Constitution. The August 2019 presidential order was issued by the President of India with the concurrence of the Government of State of Jammu and Kashmir. In effect, meant the concurrence of the governor since there was no legally elected government there. The order was issued using the third clause of Article 370, which authorized the President of India to declare article inoperative with exceptions and modifications, but only if recommended by the State Constituent Assembly to do so, which ceased to function in 1957. To circumvent the legal issue, he first added a new clause to Article 367, which deals with the interpretation of the Constitution. He replaced the phrase Constituent Assembly of State with Legislative Assembly of State, which also was suspended. The order says that any reference to the Legislative Assembly will be construed as a reference to the Governor of Jammu and Kashmir, who is actually an appointee of the central government of India. Therefore, the Indian Parliament now was functioning for the State Legislative Assembly. So the parliament, which is taking rights of the people away from them, is acting as their representative. That is irony. The people of Kashmir never consented to the constituent or the legislative assembly of the state and so-called the government of Jammu and Kashmir. But the Parliament of India did, and they are not following the constitutional practices in their own constitution. Therefore, the action of 5th August 2019 stands disropt of any constitutional, legal, and moral authority. The illegal action of abrogation of Article 370 does not have any legal cover either in the Indian or in the constitution of the Indian occupied state of Jammu and Kashmir. It is at the same time violation of all international obligations and resolutions of the United Nations Security Council. Therefore, this highly condemnable action by India stands as a new addition of inhuman sufferings to the ordeal of the people of Kashmir. The abrogation order by the nationalistic government of India resulted in resentment by the people of Kashmir. And the Indian forces launched its worst crackdown on the basic civil and human rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, imposing the curfew, imposed restrictions on movement of people and journalists, refusing children and students their right to education, has shut down landlines, internet, broadband services, has jailed political leaders, social activists, youth, and children. The tourism and livelihood activities are shut down too. People are even refused access to healthcare. This is the sad reality prevailing in the Kashmir since the revocation of the Article 370 and 35A. The people of Kashmir have been through one of history's worst lockdowns since 2019. The action has escalated the tension between India and Pakistan. It is affecting the regional stability and the relationships of countries in the region. The action of India is having far-reaching ramifications beyond the region and is throwing the shadow over the issue of international peace. It will affect the Indian domestic politics as well, with increasing the already highly charged Hindutva extremism and which have the impact on the minorities in India. This action by India have curbed the economic development of region badly, which is impoverished and have made region more vulnerable. It seems that India is not willing to take a lesson from the history and let the people of Kashmir decide their own future. We are gathered here not only to condemn this illegal action by the state of India. We are here to express our solidarity with the oppressed people of Kashmir in their just struggle for right of self-determination. By marking this day of illegality by India, we are sending the message to the besieged people of Kashmir that we have not forgotten you, and we stand with you in your just struggle for the right of self-determination. Let me, in the end, appreciate the highly commendable role of Pakistan, which has stood firmly with the suppressed people of Jammu and Kashmir in their struggle for the right of self-determination. Pakistan, facing a lot of its own challenges, have not backed out from supporting the people of Kashmir. Pakistan has also kept avoiding retaliation to the provocation by the Indian forces on the border for the sake of peace. That is highly commendable role by the people and the government of Pakistan. Thank you. And now we are going to watch a short documentary on the current situation in Kashmir.
19 Kashmiris were stripped of their identity by revoking Article 370 and a curfew was imposed. All means of traveling and communication, including the internet and mobile service, were cut off. Kashmir was isolated from the rest of the world so that the oppression and violation of human rights happening in Kashmir could be kept hidden from the world. Kashmiri youth, who have been at the forefront of the freedom movement, are the major target of Indian forces of occupation. They are being arrested and martyred in fake encounters. They have been maimed, amputated, and disabled as a consequence of the brutal torture being carried out at the interrogation centers. And more than 10,000 innocent Kashmiris have been disappeared forever. The Kashmiri men and women who raise their voices against the Indian brutality are being oppressed indiscriminately. The pellet gun banned throughout the world is being used on Kashmiris relentlessly. More than 6,500 Kashmiris have been severely injured and about 800 have lost their eyesight due to the excessive and uncontrolled use of this lethal weapon. India has failed to crush the Kashmiri freedom movement despite all its atrocious tactics. Now, on the pretext of counter-insurgency, they are destroying the whole localities by the use of explosives and setting them ablaze, leaving hundreds of Kashmiri families shelterless.
Armed forces there, they have complete impunity. There's a legislation called the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, wherein that the army personnel, whatever they do, they rape, they disappear, they murder, they torture people there randomly, and then they cannot be prosecuted. Government of India is convinced that they can get away with everything, whatever she is doing in Kashmir.
The occupation forces stepped up the genocide of the Kashmiri populace through fake encounters in the name of in courts with so-called terrorists. The increasing acts of state terrorism have further strengthened Kashmiris' belief that their survival is linked with Pakistan. Russell Tribunal on Kashmir, held recently in Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, is a positive development, and it has proved a new hope for Kashmiris. This grassroots initiative is designed to shed light on war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by India and Kashmir.
I can see a lot of similarities between genocide that happened in Bosnia in 1990s and the genocide that happened and that is currently happening in Kashmir.
Russell's Tribunal on Kashmir helped expose the genocide in Kashmir and publicly pulled the rug out from the old myths, constructing India as the world's biggest democracy.
The contradiction that India is referred to as the world's largest democracy, while not only recently enshrining Modi's fascism into law with the Citizenship Act, but continuing to maintain the most militarized zone in the world in Kashmir with up to 1 million troops. It's when our global conscience has been sufficiently disturbed that we're able to activate the necessary pressure to stop genocide. Working against us in that regard is that the purveyors of violence, settler colonialism, and ethnic cleansing maintain not just superior military capacity, but the ability to black out, bomb, and cripple the media exposure of those crimes.
Another positive development from Kashmiri's viewpoint in December 2021 was the United Nations General Assembly in New York adopted with consensus a Pakistan-sponsored resolution titled Universal Realization of the Right of the Peoples to Self-Determination, which unequivocally supports the right to self-determination for all peoples under subjugation, alien domination, and foreign occupation, including those of Indian-occupied Kashmir. The adoption of the resolution with consensus has provided the people of Indian-occupied Kashmir a new hope in their just struggle for self-determination and freedom from oppression and occupation. Russell Tribunal and United Nations General Assembly's resolution are the manifestation that Kashmir issue is no more a neglected issue. And time is not far off when India would be compelled to stop gross human rights violations in occupied Jammu and Kashmir and implement UN resolutions by holding a free and fair plebiscite to give the people of Kashmir their inherent right to self-determination.
मैं उनको बोल रही हूँ कि अंकल आपने ये क्या किया, आपको कैसे लगा मेरा बाप ये है? तो वो वहां से हंस रहे हैं। शहीदों को प्लीज आप हमें डेड बॉडी दीजिए। वो गुनहगार नहीं था, वहां सिर्फ 3 लोगों को मारा गया। क्यों? क्योंकि वो मुसलमान थे।
Thank you. Dear audience, our next speaker of today does not actually require any introduction, since almost all of us do know him very well. Majority of us, I think, will consider him as our friend. I mean, ex-Prime Minister Mr. Kjell Magne Bondevik, who has been in the service of the people of Norway for more than 4 decades. From a backbencher in the parliament to the one of the longest serving minister and prime minister of Norway, he has, after his retirement from active politics, served for the cause of human rights through Oslo Center, which he chairs. Mr. Bondevik is with us online. And Mr. Bondevik, if you can hear me, I humbly request you to take the floor to share your views with us on the ongoing suffering of the people of Kashmir. Floor over to you, Mr. Bondevik.
Thank you so much. As we know, the conflict in Kashmir has lasted for 75 years, ever since the establishment of India and Pakistan in 1947, the same year when I was born. The conflict is today largely forgotten in the international community. But as we also saw in this video presentation, many people are still suffering every day. Therefore, I think it's very good that the embassy here in Oslo and also other Pakistani embassies are organizing webinars like this in these days to get more focus on this tragic conflict. As we know, the territory of Kashmir is divided between India and Pakistan by a so-called line of control that limits the movement of people and business across this border. Families are splitted, the human suffering is huge, and human rights abuses are well documented, also by the United Nations. I was visiting Kashmir on both sides a few years ago. I saw with my own eyes the loss of opportunities, the human suffering. And I was also visiting the line of control and could look into both sides of Kashmir. This was the first time for many years that an international leader got access to the Indian-controlled Kashmir. And it was consequently also breaking news in media in the region. There have been several violent periods throughout the years where also China has been involved at times. The issue has been discussed in the UN a number of times, and resolutions have been adopted demanding a referendum on the future status of Kashmir. But India has not accepted such a referendum. Initiatives has also been put in place for ceasefire and peace, however, never resulting in a final peace agreement. It seems to be more and more evident that there is no military solution to this conflict. In 2003, former President Musharraf initiated a political solution through a so-called four-steps approach. Without insisting on a referendum, India and Pakistan should meet for a dialogue. The parties should recognize Kashmir as a central conflict issue. They should identify and eliminate what was unacceptable for both. They should strive for a solution acceptable to both countries and, most importantly, acceptable for the people of Kashmir. A ceasefire was implemented and meetings on high level took place. But after a terrorist attack, the talks were terminated. A new initiative was taken in 2012 between President Zardari of Pakistan and Prime Minister Singh of India. But this also, unfortunately, failed. I have personally discussed the situation with President Zardari, with former President Musharraf, and also with current political leaders of Pakistan. And I have also approached in the Indian side, but I must admit that it's more difficult to reach the top level of India discussing this issue. As we know, some time ago, India changed the status of Kashmir and reduced its autonomy. We have experienced more violence, suffering, and many civilians have been killed. The conflict is dangerous when we know that both countries have nuclear weapons. It's very serious. And today I will also have a special appeal to the Indian government to secure a fair trial for the chairman of GKLF, Mohammed Yasin Malik. He has been in prison for a long time. He is under threat of death penalty, and he has started an indefinite hunger strike, and his situation is very, very serious. I really try to reach out to the Indian government to solve this situation, to give him a fair trial, and maybe that could also be a first step as a confidence building measure. It is really high time and urgent to initiate new political efforts to solve the conflict, which can pave the way for ceasefire and for peace. The United Nations should first of all feel this responsibility. I appeal to Secretary General Antonio Guterres to take a new initiative. The people of Kashmir deserve it. I saw with my own eyes, and we all know that there is a great potential for a positive development and progress in Kashmir, both with regard to business and especially for tourism in this beautiful landscape. So let us utilize all opportunities to work for reconciliation and peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bunvik. On my behalf and on behalf of all the audience here, and on behalf of the Pakistan Embassy and the entire Kashmiri people who actually do know that you are a true friend of them. And I can see that you are still as much energetic as I met you first time, I think in 1980, at the Bolkeshan. They organized a seminar by your youth in Christian Folkepart Sungdom. At that time, I think it was Dr. Noibroten who was chairing that party. So thank you very much. And we hope that you will continue and keep on supporting the people of Kashmir in their just right of struggle for the self-determination. Thank you very much. Dear friends, we are pleased and honored to have with us Ms. Kari Elizabeth Koski. Ms. Koski is a young and energetic politician who have already left footprints in the Norwegian politics. And I am very much sure that we will see much more of it in future. We are very well aware of the fact that the SV, the Socialist Leftist Party, as a party in the parliament, is watchguard of human rights violation and never compromise on that. And never hesitate to make the government of Norway aware of its responsibility for following up the human rights worldwide. We are very pleased, Koski, that you could be with us here today, and I'm honored to pass the floor to you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you also for inviting me here to this interesting seminar. I would like to start by saying that it's a common responsibility to make sure that the internationally will be more attention to the conflict of Kashmir than it's been over the past years. And I think that Norway should play a more active role in that area. For SV, it's the fate of the people of Kashmir that is our greatest concern. Therefore, we say loud and clear, freedom, dignity, and self-determination for the people of Kashmir. Kashmir must no longer be a tool in the game of a great power rivalry. The sad story is that the people of Kashmir has been a victim for too long for this rivalry between great powers. And 70 years after the borders were drawn, the conflict over Kashmir is still one of the most inflamed conflicts internationally. And the largest victims of that is the people and the families of Kashmir with various backgrounds and religions, many of whom are separated also by the borders. And the consequences for these people, as you so very well know here, is enormous. This must stop. Kashmir must again be autonomous as before 2019, and the people must regain their self-determination. India must reverse Kashmir's constitutional status to August the 5th, 2019. We also obviously condemn the human rights abuses in Kashmir. And Norway, in our view, must work for an immediate, independent, and impartial investigation into the unlawful detention, disappearances, and killings of civilians and journalists in Kashmir. SV will also urge the Norwegian government to demand that the civil liberties of people of Kashmir and their lawful leadership be respected and reinstated immediately. That is something that we will follow up towards the Norwegian government as well. And I must also say that I agree with the previous speaker, Mr. Bondevik. There is no military solution to Kashmir. So Norway, with our previous history of being a good facilitator for peace negotiations, must consider to take this role also in the conflict of Kashmir. Through our seat in the UN Security Council, we must be a much stronger voice for peace and human rights in Kashmir, but also in other areas of conflict and war. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kaski. Ladies and gentlemen, since the last national election to the parliament in Norway, we are lucky to have the Red Party represented in the parliament. The presence of Red Party in parliament is by many considered as a fresh breeze as far as it concerns the issue of human rights. Ever since 2020 election, the Red Party has raised voice against every violation regardless of where it happens. This is something which the human rights activists regard as a big progress for the work of human rights worldwide. We have very energetic and hard-working member of the parliament, Tobias Drevland Lund, among us here today. And I'm really looking forward to listen to you and the work your party is doing for the human rights in the parliament and specifically for the suppressed people of Kashmir. I welcome you and pass floor to you, Mr. Tobias.
Thank you for the introduction, and dear friends, Mr. Ambassador, thank you for the invitation here today at this seminar. The situation in Kashmir is bad, and first and foremost for the people, the oppressed people themselves that suffer under Indian suppression. The international community has for too long turned a blind eye to the conflict, and unfortunately the conflict in Kashmir is often forgotten by the international community and in the political debate, even though it should be given the highest attention. Kashmir is today one of the world's most deadlocked and long-lasting conflicts. It's one of the world's most militarized zones, where the lives and liberties of the population are controlled through draconian laws, which involve excessive use of detentions, arrests, searches, seizures, and the use of lethal force. Eyewitnesses who have been in Kashmir lately have seen closed shops, a crippled healthcare system, and public service effectively prevented from doing their jobs. And we also saw the dramatic videos there earlier today making clear that this situation is really bad for the people. And in August 2019, the Indian Prime Minister Modi abolished the special status of Indian-controlled Kashmir and threw elected officials and thousands of citizens into prison. In addition, the government has signaled that it will change the population composition in Kashmir. This is Modi's so-called master plan to further tighten the grip over the people in Kashmir. And the Indian government's action in Indian-controlled Kashmir may constitute a violation of several of the provisions of the Geneva Conventions. In 2019, the Modi government introduced an illegal curfew, and the freedom of expression was getting even worse. All forms of communications, including landlines, mobiles, and the internet, have been restricted, and these measures have been strongly criticized for violating a number of human rights. This has also led to medical services not being able to provide necessary help to the people that actually need it, and there's a shortage of food and medical equipment. And in addition, the Indian armed forces have also been attacking ambulances and hospitals at some occasions. So India has placed around 1 million troops in occupied Kashmir. The Indian army in Kashmir operates differently than it does in the rest of India, and the Indian army has been accused of committing human rights abuses against the people of Kashmir at many occasions. Hundreds of Kashmiris have been detained without trial, and Muslims are most at risk. Large sections of the population have been affected by the Modi government's campaign against Muslims. India is often, as we heard here earlier, portrayed as the world's largest democracy, also in the Norwegian public, actually. But the truth is that the government of Modi is a regime turning more and more authoritarian. And Prime Minister Modi's Hindu nationalist, ethno-nationalist ideology is dangerous. Prime Minister Modi must lay his hands off the occupied Kashmir. And Norway has for a long time worked to tighten their ties with India, and it's important in all these occasions that the Norwegian government is aware of its responsibility and states clearly, both publicly and in direct talks with the Indian authorities, that the systematic discrimination and displacement of the country's Muslim population and the Muslim population in Kashmir must stop. 2 years ago, the Red Party leader, Moxnes, raised awareness in a written question in Parliament to the then Foreign Minister of the Conservative Party, Ine Marie Eriksen Søreide. That occasion was that India's approximately 200 million Muslims are today subjected to systematic discrimination by the country's government. Violent groups have also attacked and driven Indian Muslims from their homes, with good help even from the police. You can see pictures of mosques, houses and shops being burnt to ashes. Social media also shows Muslims being beaten and forced to sing the national anthem of India. Women are subjected to harassment, rape, and it's also reported that people have been burnt alive. This is simply not acceptable. It's horrible. The Red Party at this time told the foreign minister, think that Norway can contribute to India respecting its obligation under international law, that systematic abuses against a country's Muslim population and in Kashmir, and how it went to stop. The Red Party, we believe in international solidarity, democracy, human rights, and the people's right to self-determination. And in the case of Kashmir, that means that we believe that the people of Kashmir and only the people of Kashmir has the right to determine its own destiny. They have the right to decide through peaceful democratic means whether they want Kashmiri independence or belong to India or Pakistan. And therefore, it's important that the Norwegian government put pressure to secure that we have a free referendum that should be held on Kashmir's future as promised according to the peace treaty of 1948. The Red Party also rejects the Hindu nationalist government's brutal crackdown against Kashmiri leaders, the Kashmiri populations, and Muslim people elsewhere in India. So to get to the end, the Red Party believe in a peaceful solution to the conflict. We will continue to use the means available to us in Parliament to push the Norwegian government to take a clear stance against the Indian government's oppression in Kashmir and in support of a peaceful democratic settlement of the conflict, respecting the will of the population in Kashmir. And we are going to push the current government to do more for the people of Kashmir than the previous government did. And we will work in Parliament to put pressure on India to end the military occupation and violence against Kashmir. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Tobias. And I must admit that I am really impressed that you are to that extent updated on the current situation in Kashmir. So thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on. The Labour Party is always present whenever the Kashmir issue is on the agenda in Oslo. Today, we are lucky to have with us the Deputy Lord Mayor of Oslo, who is representing the Norwegian Labour Party. Abdullah Alsbeck is very much familiar with the issue of international human rights and is always on the barricades to raise the voice for the suppressed and the victims of human rights abuses. Before I pass the floor to Abdullah, since it's the first time he is in a gathering like this here today, I would avail the opportunity on behalf of you and the embassy also congratulate him for becoming the Deputy Lord Mayor at Oslo. Thank you, Abdullah. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Khalid, for this kind introduction. Mr. Ambassador, dear friends, We are in the month of Muharram, actually. And I know that the days of Ashura are marked in Pakistan as well as Norway and other countries. There are days when we are invited to reflect on our history, on what went wrong, on how we can stand up for justice. That is why we also mark the 5th of August, because of course people in Kashmir must live under basic human rights. Rights such as freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and the right to decide one's own future. We live in turbulent times. The war in Ukraine affects us all, but also the situation in India with less democracy and suppression of minority rights, especially Muslims, affect us. It shows that India is in many ways going in the wrong direction. As for Kashmir, of course, decisions from the UN must be followed up. The will of the people is what must be heard. We in the Labour Party believe in a peaceful solution to the conflict through dialogue and where people are cooperative. We know that dialogue and peaceful solution to any conflict is best for everyone and for the world peace. Peace to remove all poverty, because the use of resources for war and conflict leads to poverty and prevents prosperity. True dialogue will lead to peace. Peace that gives hope that brings prosperity to the people. That is why we in the Labour Party will support working for a peaceful solution to the Kashmir conflict. I would like to thank Mr. Ambassador for the invitation and thank you for your attention. Thank you, Abdullah. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gadli Pista is not an unknown name to the Pakistani diaspora in Norway. Even before becoming the chairman of the party Centrum, he left some valuable footprints in the Norwegian public life. For 3 years back, he, along with his supporters, established the party Centrum, the party that has put the basic human rights in the Norwegian society on the agenda and undoubtedly attracted a lot of attention among the immigrants and especially among the Pakistani diaspora. Guy, before I hand over the floor to you, I want to thank you for your conviction of supporting the people of Kashmir and your participation in previous Kashmir Solidarity seminars. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by thanking His Excellency Babar Min for inviting me again to talk about this very, very important topic we're talking about today. Party Centrum is extremely aware of all the problems and the suffering of the people of Kashmir. As you know, we are a young, very young party, which entered the nation's political scene in December 2020. And for those who don't know me, I'm a lawyer by profession, and I advocate human rights cases vigorously. Therefore, it quickly became quite interesting for me and, of course, for the Parti Centrum to look into the political situation and the issue of Kashmir. In Parti Centrum, we have many people, and we are lucky, very lucky, to have many people from Pakistan to have made efforts to include the Kashmir war as a prioritized issue for us to advocate. I will not use much time to educate you on this matter. I'm certain that there are far more knowledgeable people present in this room on Kashmir and its history. The illegal occupation of Kashmir by India is a matter of gross violation of human rights. That's why it's of utmost importance that politicians in Norway educate themselves on this 70-year-old war that has been going on. And even more important, that Norway involved themselves politically to become a part of a peaceful solution to this matter. As we have experienced, when other nations get involved, wars can be solved. Recently, we all witnessing the Ukraine and Russia war and the heavy consequence of it globally because of all the nations involved in it. Internationally, Norway is known to have a proud history in peacekeeping and stabilizing war zones. And yet, few fellow political talk about this particular conflict in the parliament. And even lesser fellow Norwegian know about the Kashmir matter. Very few Norwegians talk about it. A seat on the Security Council provides mandates for peacekeeping operation, political missions, and sanctions regimes. Norway specifically participate in shaping the discussion and statements made by the world's most important body in order to safeguard international peace and security. In my opinion, we should therefore use our mandate in the Security Council in UN to talk about the human rights that are prevailed upon of the people of Kashmir. We are living in a time of increasing geopolitical conflicts. The Kashmir conflict is one of the world's most heated and protracted conflicts. The world is on the sideline, watching and observing. Surely more must and can be done. We know that human rights have been strengthened through Norway's presentation in many ongoing conflicts. It's therefore important that Norway use its voice to initiate dialogue, humanitarian aid, and observation in Kashmir, so that Norway also in this conflict can appear as a peacekeeping nation. Sitting government has no mention of Kashmir along with countries that are in crisis in their human rights section of their political platform. The Kashmir conflict, its complex picture, should be, in my opinion, a focus issue for the Støre government. Norway has a proud history as a host nation of major international peace negotiations, and the Kashmir conflict should therefore be no exception. We in Partiet Sentrum will advocate that the Kashmir conflict be addressed and exceed in accordance with the UN human rights. We will continue to raise the Kashmir issue in various forums, in addition to the fact that Kashmir has been adopted in the party's program, of course. We have, in fact, included Kashmir along with Myanmar as some of the most heavily conflict zones that need a political will and power to get involved nations on the dialogue table. I promise that Partiet Sentrum will speak loud and clear about Kashmir on every forum that human rights are mentioned. We are determined to focus on the Kashmir people's human rights matter in the future. We will also make sure that Norwegian politicians will be more involved in the matter of coming future by talking to them about Kashmir from our platform. And I hope that this day and days like this give hope to the Kashmirian people that are suffering so heavily. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guy Lipista. Our next speaker is Mr. Atta Ali. An original politician of Pakistani origin who has been holding various elected public offices and had the privilege of raising the issue of Kashmir in Norwegian Parliament. I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Atta Ali and give the floor to him so he can share his views with us on Kashmir. Mr. Atta Ali. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. Ambassador Sahib, honorable guests, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I think there is more information, knowledge and awareness about Kashmir issue than earlier. I remember when I raised this question in Norwegian Parliament in 1994, even many political parties in Parliament didn't know what Kashmir issue was. And many journalists I talked to, they asked me, what is Kashmir issue? So now there is a much more awareness about this issue. But I think still we have to educate Norwegian society more about this issue. I am not going to repeat everything which has been said earlier today. I think it is not a border dispute between India and Pakistan, as many may still believe in Norway. Number one, it is about 8 million Kashmiris' right to decide their own future. As we know, then when India and Pakistan was created, they were separated, the basic principle was that the princely states, so-called princely states, ruled by Maharajas and Nawabs, they could join India or Pakistan. What happened in Kashmir's case was that Maharaja Hari Singh, Maharaja of Kashmir, he joined India, or he was forced to join India. While the population of Jammu and Kashmir, 77% of them Muslim at that time, they opposed the Maharaja decision and they wanted to join Pakistan. And that led to the first war between India and Pakistan. And Kashmir was divided, as you know, in two parts. One is Indian occupied Kashmir, and one-third of it is in Pakistan. That means that the people of Kashmir are denied the democratic right to decide their own future. It is also about the UN resolutions. It is interesting to mention that it was India who brought up this case to the UN. And UN for 75 years ago passed several resolutions regarding Kashmir. And it was decided that people of Kashmir should have they will be given the opportunity to decide their own future by a referendum. I have to say that in third world countries, and especially in Muslim world, there is a feeling of being ignored. And Shel Magnabondevik said that this conflict is largely forgotten. It is very sorry to hear that. Very sad to hear that, actually. And this, because we know that America and Western powers went to war against Iraq to implement UN resolution back in 1991. But when it comes to Kashmir, there is silence. There is lack of interest. There is no pressure on India. And when it comes to Palestine, the same situation, there is a lack of interest. There is no pressure on Israel. So this feeling of being ignored in Muslim world, it creates a lot of emotions, maybe a lot of negative feelings against Western powers. And this is also about the human rights situation in Kashmir. As we know, there is a massive violation of human rights in Indian-held Jammu and Kashmir. The rapes and killings and torture almost on a daily basis.
And number four, it is also about, and maybe it is most important that this issue, burning issue of Kashmir, is the danger to peace, not in that part of the world, but for the world as a whole. We know that India and Pakistan are big countries. India is the second largest country population-wise, and Pakistan is number 5. Both countries have big armies. Both countries have nuclear weapons. So if a war between India and Pakistan, and if it's a war where a country used nuclear weapons, it will really be a danger to world peace. So I'm very glad to say that I see many Norwegian politicians here today, representative 4 political parties and Shell Magdeburg, 5 political parties, actually. I think we have all responsibility for contributing to find a peaceful solution to this issue. But maybe you are member of parliament, you are representative political parties, maybe you can make a difference by raising this question to the parliament, pushing India. Maybe you can use your influence in your political parties that there must be, we have to find a peaceful solution. Otherwise, it's going to be a danger for world peace. It is said that stand up for what you believe in. Stand up for what you believe in, even that means standing alone. I think we have to make sure that people of Kashmir are not alone in their struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Ladies and gentlemen, before I request to His Excellency Ambassador Babar Amin, let me say a few words. His Excellency is one of the most experienced and seasoned diplomats I have come across. His Excellency has, through his career, have served with the top leadership of Pakistan on foreign affairs and have been in key positions in some of the major breakthroughs related to the Pakistani relationships with his friends. A lot of untold story is with His Excellency, which I hope will be revealed sometime. Your Excellency, I'm honored to give the floor to you for concluding remarks of today. His Excellency, the Ambassador of Pakistan, Mr. Babar Amin.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Excellencies, respected guests, I have the honor to convey my deep gratitude for your participation in today's hybrid seminar and webinar on Youm Istehsaal Kashmir, a day that is observed every year to mark fresh and enhanced reign of oppression, exploitation, and usurpation of Kashmiris by Indian occupation forces, by allowing abrogation of autonomy and removal of restrictions on demographic changes in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, IIOJK. I owe my special thanks to our worthy speakers for raising their voices today in solidarity with the people of IIOJK who are suffering due to the unprecedented human rights violations, including their fundamental right to self-determination. I would like to gratefully acknowledge Honorable Kjell Magne Bondevik, former Prime Minister of Norway, Honorable Kari Elisabeth Kaci, Honorable Tobias Lund, Member of the Norwegian Parliament, Honorable Abdullah Al-Sabi, the Lord Mayor of Oslo, Honorable Mr. Geir Livstad, Chairman of the Central Party, Honorable Mr. Khalid Mahmood, former Member of Norwegian Parliament, and Honorable Athar Ali Chaudhry Sahib, former Member of the Norwegian Parliament. Respected ladies and gentlemen, 3 years have passed since India's illegal and unilateral actions of 5th August 2019, wherein it successfully tried to alter the internationally recognized disputed status of the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Simultaneously, it embarked on a diabolic plan to alter the demographic structure of its occupied territory. Through these illegal actions, India abolished autonomous status of IIO-JK and removed restrictions on change to the region's demography. The autonomy and demographic preservation in Jammu and Kashmir are obligatory owing to the valid United Nations Security Council resolutions that mandate holding of a plebiscite under the UN auspices so that the people of Jammu and Kashmir can freely exercise their right to self-determination. While India has been trying to convey the false impression that the Security Council resolutions on Kashmir had eroded, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has dispelled such impression and false propaganda many times since the 5th of August 2019. The Secretary General has been emphatic that the United Nations position on Kashmir is governed by the UN Charter and the applicable UN Security Council resolutions. Notably, these resolutions explicitly bar any administrative or demographic changes to the status of Jammu and Kashmir so that only indigenous Kashmiris and their descendants can vote in the plebiscite. The demographic changes are, however, now being done at a very fast pace. Already, Jammu and Kashmir citizenship certificates have been issued to around 3.5 million non-Kashmiris from various Indian states, which is about half of the 8 million indigenous population of the Indian occupied territory. The territory of IIO-JK has been further bifurcated into two union territories of Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh, directly controlled by the Indian central government, while Jammu and Kashmir Union Territory would, which is yet to be, would have a legislative representative assembly for meeting municipal needs. Ladakh has been denied of this and would be directly managed by the Indian Lieutenant Governor. Simultaneously, delimitation of electoral constituencies is being done for pre-vote engineering to reduce Muslim majority in many constituencies into minority. The illegal actions of India have been accompanied by military siege, collective punishments, communication blockade, internet shutdowns, victimization under COVID smoke screen, enforced disappearances of minor boys and political party activists, custodian and extrajudicial killings, search and cordon operations, and use of military ammunition to demolish civilian houses, denial of burial rights, sexual violence against women, pellet gun blinding of peaceful demonstrators, using civilians as human shields, as well as subjecting Kashmiris to religious, cultural, and social apartheid. According to Indian Home Ministry, custodial deaths in IIO-JK during the last 2 years increased by 9-folds, whereas a total of 2,544 such deaths were recorded all over India. The double-speak and diabolic narrative of occupation forces that their illegal actions of 5th August 2019 were for the development of IIO-JK have no takers, least of all the Kashmiris. What kind of a development must come with the siege of 8 million people of Kashmir by 1 million Indian security forces armed to their teeth? And for whose welfare is this supposedly intended? Several reports by the UN Special Rapporteurs and experts on human rights have also expressed grave concern over the blatant human rights abuses in IIO-JK. The experts in the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights have expressed grave concern over the revocation of special autonomous status and subsequent passing of so-called domicile rules that allow non-Kashmiris to obtain citizenship in the Indian occupied territory. The experts raised alarms over the effect of demographic changes on religious, linguistic, and ethnic identities of its people, and the potential discrimination against them in important matters, including employment, land ownership, which is already underway. The deputy's apprehension are not unfounded. Traditional forest land owned by the herds grazing and the herds grazing rights of the indigenous Muslim Bakarwal community have been seized by the Indian government. Some of the long-term property allotments of Muslim owners have been cancelled. Many of the Muslim houses are being demolished on flimsy grounds, while properties of followers of some other faiths in the same vicinity are left unscratched. Permission of Jammu and Kashmir government is no longer required for allotment of Kashmiri land to Indian armed forces. The land confiscated from Kashmiris is thus being lavishly granted to the security forces for establishing cantonments, permanent camps, holiday homes, and family accommodations. Simultaneously, it is also being doled out to the non-Kashmiri religious organizations. In one such incident, 62 acres of Kashmiri land was granted for building a temple complex, merely on payment of around 608 Norwegian krone per year to an organization based in the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh. Majority of Muslim population is being discriminated in public service employments. 70% of Muslim population in Kashmir only has 5 out of 24 departmental secretaries. 12 among the 58 top bureaucrats, 7 out of 66 police officers, and only 7 deputy commissioners in 20 districts of IIUJK. Dictates are being routinely issued to schools, children, academic staff, and civil servants to comply and compulsorily participate in Hindu religious customs such as Surya Namaskar or sun homage. 5 UN special rapporteurs in a letter to the Indian government have expressed concern over the arbitrary detentions, extrajudicial killings, arbitrary executions, and enforced disappearances, torture and cruel, inhuman punishments, and deplorable denial of customary burial rights to the families of Muslims, especially those falling victims to the encounter of the security forces. It may be recalled that the dead body of the senior-most Kashmiri leader, Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, was brutally snatched from his family and buried without participation by anybody. There have been many other such communications by the UN Special Rapporteurs on deteriorating human rights situation in IOJK since the August 2019. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights had earlier issued 2 comprehensive reports in 2018 and 2019 that documented grave human rights violations in IOJK and recommended UN Commission of Inquiry, which India refused. Ladies and gentlemen, Indian government has always sought to dehumanize Kashmiris by trying to equate their UN-recognized struggle for right to self-determination with terrorism, even resorting to false flag attacks. The pardon granted by the Lieutenant Governor of IIUJK to Deputy Superintendent of Police Davinder Singh, citing state security interests, more than established that the 2019 Pulwama blast was a false flag attack. Davinder was arrested in 2020 while transporting alleged terrorists from Jammu and Kashmir to New Delhi for an intended attack. He is a notorious false flag handler who had long enjoyed confidence of the Indian deep state. He was posted in Pulwama before the incident of terrorist attack, and strong evidence connected him to the suicide attacker. 6 minority in IIUJK still mourns the cold-blooded false flag assassination of 35 Sikhs men in March of 2000 by Indian Army and blaming it on Kashmiri militants. The purpose was to convey a message to the visiting US President Clinton that Kashmiris were terrorists. Later, to strengthen their treachery, Indian Army cold-bloodedly killed 3 Kashmiri laborers, dubbing them as terrorists responsible for the Chhattis Singh Pura massacre. Later, in 2017, decorated Indian Army General K.S. Gill, retired, who was part of the investigation team, admitted in a televised interview that Indian Army was involved in massacre, and the report of the same was submitted to the then Indian Home Minister Al Kirbani, which was not made public. Ladies and gentlemen, Kashmiri Hurriyat leaders demanding the right to self-determination, human rights activists, social influencers, and journalists have been incarcerated for under draconian Indian laws such as the Public Security Act, Foreign Exchange Management Act, FEMA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, UPA, for silencing their dissent. Veteran leader Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, who died in 2021, had also been charged under FEMA. Shabir Shah, who is recognized as the prisoner of conscience by the Amnesty International, has spent more than 33 years of his life in jail. Last month, Shah completed 5 years of his current continuous incarceration. Yasin Malik was sentenced to imprisonment in May this year on fake terror funding charges dating back to 1990s. Malik observed 10-day hunger strike before yesterday and for being denied personal appearance in another fake terrorism case against him. He has also remained behind bars for a prolonged period on various fake charges during most of his political life. Due to immense torture, his kidneys have been irreversibly damaged. There are many other Kashmiri leaders, and if I name each and every one of them, it will take a very long time. So I would like to here mention the abstracts from various human rights organizations' reports. Amnesty International, in a recent report on Kashmir, stated that the people of Jammu and Kashmir have suffered gross human rights violations and abuses for decades. The sheer impunity with which human rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir have been systematically disregarded by Indian authorities must end. Last year, in a bid to silence Amnesty International for speaking for Kashmiri's right, the Indian government charged Amnesty International of money laundering, compelling it to stop its operations in India. Last month, in July, Indian government imposed a penalty of 76.4 million Norwegian krone on Amnesty International and its CEO on the charges of money laundering, which is obviously to punish it for continuously speaking for the Kashmiri's right. The Freedom House World Report 2022 has declared IIUJK as not free, awarding it merely 27 out of 100 marks. The report takes into consideration the effects of removing regions' autonomy, arbitrary bifurcation, and demographic changes on the political rights, civil liberties, and human rights, etc. in IIUJK. The Harvard Law Review termed Indian illegal actions of 5th August 2019 as the tipping point for settler colonial project in Kashmir. The Stoke-White Investigations and Independent Investigation Unit of British law firm, in its report, detailed 2,000 testimonies of civilians into Indian human rights abuses, including torture, extrajudicial killings, detentions of minors, and concluded that India was guilty of war crimes. The Norwegian Rafto Foundation has called for immediate unconditional release of human rights defender Khurram Parvez, detained for his advocacy of human rights. Parvez is a recipient of Rafto Laureate 2017 award. Rafto has also awarded prize to Kashmiris Parveena Ahangar and Parvez Imroz for the decades-long struggle for human rights in IIUJK. In the end, I would like to appeal to the global community, especially Norway, which holds great pride for defending human rights world over, to raise their voice for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. In keeping with Norway's high priority for human rights, peace building and peacemaking, it must demand from its interlocutors to respect human rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, including their inalienable right to self-determination. Implement without further delay relevant UN resolutions to allow people of Jammu and Kashmir to exercise their will through a free and fair plebiscite under the UN auspices. Immediately withdraw the illegal legislations to abrogate autonomy of IIUJK and removing restrictions on its demographic changes, including the domicile order. Completely lift the inhuman lockdown, restore all fundamental freedoms of Kashmiris, restoration of all communications, and repeal its draconian laws such as Armed Forces Special Powers Act, Public Security Act, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, FEMA, and others. Accept Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights reports and recommendations on Jammu and Kashmir, agreeing to establish the UN-supervised Commission of Inquiry to comprehensively investigate into all charges of human rights violations. Allow international humanitarian organizations to reach out to the besieged population of IIUJK for provision of food, medical supplies, and giving relief in humanitarian crisis faced by it. Immediately release all Kashmiri political leaders, social activists, rights defenders, journalists, teenagers, and others detained under draconian laws or found criminal charges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now we are having 2 minutes for question. If somebody wants to ask a question, then please raise your hand. I know some of guests want to leave early, but just for a few minutes. Well, it seems that we don't have any question. Then I would like to thank the audience for taking the time to attend this seminar and expressing the solidarity with the suppressed and besieged people of Kashmir. But now I will ask the audience, name by name, to applaud the key note speakers here today. And we will start and applaud for Mr. Shell Magnebunevich. And applause for Taski. Tobias. Abdullah. Guy. Atar Ali. And His Excellency. Thank you. And my dear guests who are present here today from political parties, me as an ex-politician, I would like to assure you one thing, and that your presence here today to express solidarity with the people of Kashmir will not pass unnoticed. The Pakistani diaspora in Norway and the Kashmiri people remembers and value the parties which stands with them and will definitely reciprocate it at the time of putting their vote in the ballot box. I can assure you this is my personal experience as an ex-politician. And thanks to all of you, who joined us on the net, and let us hope that our efforts will alleviate the sufferings of the people of Kashmir and the region of India subcontinent will soon see the dawn of a peaceful and prosperous region. Thank you very much. And now I will request on behalf of His Excellency, all of you to join us for a refreshment and a dinner in hotel. Thank you. और एक साथ ऐलान भी है, कल शाम 6 बजे नॉर्वेजियन पार्लियामेंट के सामने एक कश्मीरियों के साथ यकजहती के लिए और कंडेमनेशन ऑफ 5 अगस्त 2019 के लिए एक जाजी मुजाहरा जो किया जा रहा है, उसमें आप सब से अपील की जाती है कि उसमें भी आप सब शिरकत करें. Das demonstration is of Stortinget I morgen klokka 18 for nettopp å fordømme og ta avstand fra den avgjørelsen av den indiske regjeringen 5. august 2019. Alle er hjertelig velkommen. Og det er også skal være en tog som skal komme dit, så det er en som går fra Søndre Nordstrand, en fra Grodal. Hvis noen ønsker å komme med sykkel, så er det så veldig bra. Hjertelig velkommen, og takk for i dag.